Hi guys, thank you for joining me for Walking with the Word. We're out on my decking today. It's a beautiful place and a beautiful day. Today I want to talk about the story of Jesus appearing to his disciples after his death and resurrection. And I want to look at a particular part of the story where Jesus takes a piece of leftover fish and eats it. Now often people will say what Jesus was doing here was he was trying to make a theological point. He was trying to demonstrate something about his resurrection. What he was trying to demonstrate was that it wasn't merely a ghost, it wasn't just an appearance of Jesus or a hallucination. This was the physical body of Jesus, that very same physical body that walked the hills of Galilee, that taught, the very same body that was crucified brutally on the cross and buried in a tomb, was now back to life and was with them. And what he did is you could see that Jesus would appear in places and they'd be like, whoa, where did he come from? He had this ability to kind of just appear and then disappear at times. But what's really interesting is he was demonstrating yet while he could do those things, it was still a physical bodily resurrection, because when you take a piece of food and you eat it, that requires a physical body. A piece of physical food must interact with a physical body in order to be eaten and digested, right? So what he was showing is that his physical body could interact with physical matter, that piece of leftover fish. Now, one of the things I love about the Bible is there's often a lot you can get, even when you look at the tiniest little details. And I want to do this today. Now, it might seem like I'm perhaps over-reading into things a little bit, and maybe that's the case. But I want to suggest that actually there's a lot of value in the over-reading I'm going to do, okay? And it's not just simply on the fact that Jesus took a piece of fish and ate it. I want to focus on the fact that that piece of fish was in fact a leftover piece of fish. What can we learn from that? What does that show us about Jesus? Can we draw any truth out of this little piece of leftover fish? Okay, so here we go. If this had a sermon title, if I was sharing this in the church, it would be a whole sermon about a piece of leftover fish, because that piece of leftover fish had a very significant role in this world. It was used to demonstrate a theological truth about the resurrected Jesus Christ. That is profound, okay? So this little piece of leftover fish is a very profound, it's a very important piece of fish in the history of this world. It was chosen for a particularly important job. It was chosen to demonstrate to Jesus' disciples that he was indeed back, the resurrected Jesus, resurrected to glory, okay? So, why the leftover fish? Why choose a piece of leftover fish? Couldn't Jesus, having died and resurrected and established who he was with all his authority, ask for a banquet to be made to him, or at least some fresh fish, right? He could have asked for anything, but he just took a piece of leftover fish. He didn't want to trouble people. He wasn't demanding a really nice big meal. He was taking a piece of the leftovers. There's so much humility here. It actually reminds you of that verse in Philippians where Paul says, even though he existed in equality with God, in the very form of God, he did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped. But instead he humbled himself, he emptied himself, he became obedient to death, even death on a cross. So you've got this emptying and this humbling process. Jesus was a humble character. He was humble on earth. But what's really cool about this particular story is it shows his humility in his resurrected body too. He's still humble. He's not demanding a feast. He's not making big demands. He just takes a piece of the leftover fish to make a point to his disciples that this is the physical resurrected body of Jesus that's with them. He has a physical resurrection body. And because of that, we know that if we share with him in his death and we partake in the communion and we bring his life into us and we join with Jesus, we'll also join with him in his resurrection. We'll have a physical resurrection just like this. So this is the first thing. There's a kind of humility in Jesus is taking this piece of leftover fish. It's just a tiny bit of the leftovers. But I think we can take it further still, right? Talking about taking a lot from small details. And I think it's this. I think the church, if we're called to be the body of Christ, we're called to the same humility. And over the centuries and over the millennia, the church has invested so much money in building these big, grand buildings that just present this magnificent image. And I understand that can speak to people about the magnificence and the glory of God. But Jesus was humble. Jesus is God in flesh, God incarnate. If you have seen Jesus, you've seen the Father. Yet he was humble. He took the leftovers. He took the small things. And I just want to say that today, as a church, we need to reflect on this. What is it that we make... Just gonna wait for a train. just right by a train line here. So what things do we overstate? What things do we overbuild? What things do we overproject? What things do we invest too much in, where we could just be taking bits of the leftovers? And that's the first challenge. Now, over the millennia, I've alluded to the fact that the church has spent loads of money building giant cathedrals, which are now part of the heritage. Don't get me wrong, they're beautiful, beautiful buildings. But the challenge here is that the resurrected Jesus still demonstrated humility. He still demonstrated taking the leftovers, taking the small thing and using them for big things. So, what things could the church learn today? Well, I think the church's risk today is not to overbuild big buildings. It can happen. I think the risk for the church is perhaps over-branding, perhaps being over-obsessed with their image. Now, don't get me wrong, branding and image and graphics and communication are important. Another train. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying those things are unimportant, I'm not saying they're entirely wrong, but they shouldn't replace the substance, and the substance is really where it's at, the values, the core, the heart. What are we doing? What are we about? Who are we inviting in? What conversations are we initiating? How are we showing love to other Christian brothers and sisters? How are we showing love to non-Christians around the world, to the people around us? How are we ministering the love of Christ to a hurting world? They're the more important questions. How are we continuing that ministry of Christ on earth? Okay, so that's really a challenge for us to kind of reflect on and think about, both as individuals, but I also think the church as a whole needs to reflect on this, the whole corporate institution, the body of Christ on earth, that we continue the ministry of Christ. Thinking about that humility and thinking about what Jesus was doing, there's something else we can gain from this. You don't need a lot to preach a gospel. I think sometimes we can feel inadequate, insignificant, like we're not equipped, like we don't have what we need. But Jesus just took a piece of leftover fish. So I would say what Jesus was doing there is he went into an environment, he went into a situation, and he used what was around him to demonstrate who he was. He took what was there already. He didn't need to bring loads of other stuff in. He didn't need to do like a fantastic party to make the point. It was a very humble thing, but he took it and used it for great purpose. And I want to encourage us just personally, as we're sharing and demonstrating Christ, that we do it in a similar way. We take small things, we take bits of leftovers, and we make them beautiful, we make them significant, we make them profound in the same way that Jesus did. So you might say that I have just massively overread into a really small detail of one of the gospel accounts, and you're probably right. But I do think there's some value in reflecting on the things that we've reflected on today. So I wanted to share these things and leave them with you to think about through the day. God bless you. Have an amazing day. Take care, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.